In the heart of a remote village, surrounded by thick forests and steep hills, there stood a peculiar church. The people called it the Church in Black because it had one strict and unbreakable rule. No one was allowed to enter the sacred grounds wearing anything other than black. From the pastor down to the youngest child, everyone dressed in black, and it had been that way for over 50 years. The villagers believed the rule was a sign of purity and humility, symbolizing the sacrifice of worldly pleasures. Their pastor, a tall and well-respected man named Pastor Michael, was known throughout the region for his charitable acts. He was wealthy, though he claimed he had no personal business ventures. His wealth, he said, was a blessing from God, given to him because of his devotion and piety. Little did anyone know that this wealth was not as pure as they thought. For years, the villagers worshipped there, unaware of the true source of the church's power. The pastor, a man known for his seemingly selfless acts of philanthropy, was adored by the people. His generosity flowed like rivers. He donated to the poor, built schools, and even claimed to have businesses in America that supported his charitable work. No one dared question his wealth or his strict rule of wearing only black to church. After all, the crops flourished, the people thrived, and the village was prosperous. But one fateful day, everything changed. Star, a youth corper, had been posted to the village for her service here. She was an outsider, full of life and bright energy, who often wore colorful clothing. It was the closest place of worship, and she had been raised in a Christian home, where attending church was a regular part of her life. Although she had heard the village rumors about the church's strange rules, she decided to attend. It was, after all, closer than any other church. On the morning she decided to visit, she wore her usual colorful dress, a striking contrast to the dark mood that seemed to hang over the village like a cloud. As she approached the church, villagers stared at her in shock. But Star walked with confidence, feeling an invisible presence guiding her every step. As she crossed the threshold of the church, something strange happened. The moment she stepped inside, the air grew thick, as though the atmosphere had been shattered. The pastor, standing at the altar, suddenly fell to the ground with a heavy thud. The congregation gasped, their eyes wide with terror. But the pastor wasn't dead. He was convulsing, his mouth foaming as he writhed on the floor. Then, the ground beneath the altar began to tremble. From the cracks in the floor, birds with pitch-black feathers emerged, their red eyes glowing with malice. Dark spirits followed, rising from the ground like smoke, swirling around the congregation. Horrified, the villagers watched as their once revered pastor screamed in agony. The pastor's eyes rolled back into his head, and his body grew limp. But before the villagers could think him dead, his eyes snapped open. He let out a guttural cry, his voice cracking as he began to speak.
I sold you all,
he rasped, his voice barely audible.
I sold your souls to the devil. Forgive me,
he cried, his voice trembling.
I have deceived you all.
The church fell into a deadly silence, the only sound being the eerie rustle of the black birds perched throughout the rafters. Pastor Michael's voice broke as he began to confess the dark truth.
I made a pact, a deal with the devil himself. It was years ago when I first took over the church. I was young, ambitious, and desperate to make this village prosper. The church was struggling, the people were poor, and I wanted to be their savior. I wanted to build something grand, something holy.
His voice cracked as he continued.
But I didn't have the means. One night, while I prayed for guidance, a man appeared in my dreams. He promised me wealth, power, and influence beyond my wildest dreams. All I had to do was give him the souls of my congregation. He gave me wealth beyond measure, and in return, I was to turn this church into a temple for him, a place where his spirits could feed on the souls of the faithful. That's why I insisted on the black clothing. It was part of the pact.
Gasps and sobs filled the room as the truth settled in. The villagers realized that every prayer, every hymn, every act of worship had been feeding a dark force. They had unknowingly given their souls to the devil. Pastor Michael broke down, sobbing, begging for mercy, but the people were beyond forgiveness. They gathered around him, their faces a mix of rage and sorrow. They felt betrayed, not just by their pastor, but by the very faith they had trusted. The spirits that hovered above them seemed to feed on their despair, growing stronger as their hearts filled with fear and anger. As he spoke, the church walls seemed to tremble, and the spirits around him howled in torment. The congregation looked on in horror, realizing the terrible truth. They had been tricked into worshiping the devil, all while thinking they were following a man of God. The pastor begged for mercy, pleading with the villagers to forgive him. But the spirits had already claimed his fate. No one came to his aid as he was dragged from the church, left to die in his home, alone and forsaken. His wife and children, who knew nothing of his dark deeds, were spared. The villagers, though heartbroken, understood that they had been innocent victims in his twisted game. With the church in ruins and the evil exposed, Star's mission was complete. She returned to her lodgings, where, in the quiet of the night, she spoke to the spirit that had sent her. "It is done," Star said. "The evil has been exposed." The goddess smiled, her voice like the rustle of leaves in the wind. "You have done well, Star." The air around her shimmered, and from the shadows emerged a figure, her goddess, a being of pure, radiant light. "You have freed them," the goddess said, her voice like a gentle breeze. "You have broken the chains that bound them to darkness. For this, you will be rewarded." Star felt a warmth envelop her, and in that moment, she was blessed with all the good things in life. Wealth, health, happiness, they would be hers forever. But more than that, she had been given a greater gift, the power to bring light to the darkest corners of the earth, to expose evil wherever it hid. You were not sent to the village merely as a corper, but as a warrior of light. The pastor's greed consumed him, and he chose the path of darkness, but you have restored balance. As a reward for her bravery, the goddess granted Star all the good things in life: wealth, happiness, and peace. She was no longer just a servant of the state. She had become a beacon of hope, carrying the light of the clean spirit wherever she went. The village, now free from the shadow of the blackened church, prospered once more. The villagers rebuilt their place of worship, this time in the light of truth, no longer bound by the chains of darkness. And as for Star, she would always be remembered as the one who saved them from the darkness, the one who had the courage to walk into the blackened church and expose the truth. As she left the village, the people hailed her as a savior, though none truly understood who or what she was. They only knew that their eyes had been opened, and the darkness that had once consumed them was no more. But Star knew her work was far from over. There were other villages, other churches, other places where evil still lurked in the shadows, and she would find them. For she was not just a servant of the goddess, she was a warrior of light, and her battle against darkness had only just begun.